Hello, Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, a coastal flooding report received praise this week, but for the wrong reasons. Its dire predictions were acknowledged for being accurate. We'll look tonight at what the latest science is telling us about coastal high water, as well as what was learned from some of the recent interior flooding. The Saints front office made waves yesterday, firing 5 assistant coaches in the wake of another disappointing season. Meanwhile, the Pelicans are flying a little higher. Our Future Watch segment examines the condition of Canal Street, and we'll look at a series of suburban store closings. At our table are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Bob Marshall, environmental reporter for The Lens. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And Jeff Duncan, sports columnist, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune. And we go over to Bob first. And the draft report of the state's coastal master plan was issued. You did a piece for The Lens on it. And there are so many questions to ask you about this. But one thing that really stuck out at me was in the 2012 report, the worst case scenario is the best case scenario for the 2017 report. What has happened?
Well, that's about sea level rise. Yeah. And what's happened is that the science on sea level rise is getting more accurate, more intensive. And the models they're using are now employing or inserting all the measurements have been taking over the last 5 to 10 years, which has been proving that this is happening, and it's actually happening at a faster rate. So now the projections for worldwide sea level rise have been increasing almost yearly as these new models come in. Mm-hmm. And so the 2 big elements that threaten the success of this plan is the fact that while the sea is rising, we're sinking, right? Coastal, the deltas are sinking. Okay. And so the new plan, every 5 years they redo this plan because of those different variables, this dynamic landscape. And they've had to face facts that when they put these new estimates of sea level rise in there, things are much grimmer.
So how has this then changed what was in the 2012 plan? Let's talk first cost.
Well, the cost, they still quote $50 billion because that was the price range that they thought they could find or raise when the first plan was developed in 2007. They're sticking to that, but analysis by Tulane University, 2 separate white papers shows that if you add inflation, just normal inflation, it'll come up to about $92 billion over the length of this 50-year plan. The big thing here is, for the first time ever, they've admitted that, or they've found out that they've always said that if the plan works perfectly, we could be building more new land than we're losing in aggregate in 50 years. Now they say that can't happen anymore because sea level rise will be too high, and subsidence is proceeding apace. So we can't win this battle. We can't break even. And in fact, even if everything works to perfection, we could still lose about 2,800 square miles of our coast. And in a 100-year storm, which we're expecting, right? Right now, about 26,000 homes and other buildings would qualify for some sort of floodproofing aid. Most of it would be elevating these homes, but 2,000 would qualify for voluntary buyouts. So
does that mean we're going to lose some coastal communities, or are they just going to disappear?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking 50 years, and lots of other scientists who have studied this, and the state had this changing course competition they did, and they think it's unrealistic to try to think you can save these communities. First of all, the cost benefit isn't there to build levees around these small places. It costs several $1 million a mile to build these levees, and if you've got 40 or 50 people living there. And that migration has actually already started. People have been moving out of these communities. For our area, the metro area, the really shocking thing will be that the North Shore is included in this map of about 5,000 buildings and homes would qualify for some type of floodproofing, even if the plan works to perfection.
Yeah, that really does jump out at you when you take a look at that map. Bob's piece is on The Lens. You can go to thelens.org and you can see it, and that map is there. On the North Shore is this pretty big blotch of blue, which indicates what the structures that would have to be mitigated in some way, flood-proofed, elevated, or even bought out. And that really is a shocker because people move to the North Shore hoping that they'd be safe from storm surge.
Well, the people who live along the lake in Mandeville have been flooded almost every recent storm. And the base elevation there is about 7.5 feet above sea level. And so if you're looking at worst case scenario on sea level rise, could be 6 feet if we don't do something about emission controls, according to all the science on this right now. If we're sinking at about 3 feet by the end of the century, this is to the end of the century, and we don't do anything about emissions, and the Antarctica begins melting rapidly, then you could see 2 meters of sea level rise by 2100, which means 9 feet of sea level rise in this area, relative sea level rise. So if you're 7 feet above sea, there's not much you can do.
So this mitigation of homes, that's called non-structural. So the structural approach to trying to protect our coast as best as we can and build up what we can is through sediment diversion and then also pumping and dredging, right?
Right. That's going to continue apace. But that is adjusted every 5 years as well, depending on what these variables are doing. And the bad news on that is that subsidence and sea level rise have progressed at such a rate that one of the diversions that was planned for Lower Plaquemines Parish is off the board now because it can't stay ahead of that rate of relative sea level rise. So, the good news is that if the plan works according to the best estimates, it could reduce annual storm damage that we're expecting by $8 billion. That tells you just the scope of this threat. If good news is that we can save $8 billion a year in storm damage.
So how far north could it go in the worst case over time?
Well, if we did nothing more today, if, say, the state said, forget it, we're not going to do another thing for the coastal wetlands or build any more levees or flood walls, and if we have the worst case scenario on sea level rise, which is proceeding at pace as well, for a 100-year storm, the worst case Category 3 storm, you could see storm surge if the storm came in at the right angle, the right time, and the right speed, almost to Baton Rouge in these lower parts of southeast Louisiana. So
$50 billion, that has an inflationary cost perhaps of $10 to $92 billion. Do we have money to pay for all of this?
We don't have any. Thanks to a disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, the Deepwater Horizon, we'll have enough money to keep going about 10 or 15 years. A lot of money's been spent so far on the really important research to find out just what these projects could do, how much is in the river, what we can do with it, and engineering. That's pretty much all been done. And so now we're at the point where, if we get the money, we can start building these things. And that's where the big payload comes in. And we don't have it. We have a few projects that can do a lot of good over the next 10 years. But after that, if we don't find a funding source, so we do less and we have more damage.
Okay, well, gee, Bob, it's been really nice talking to you about
Merry
this.
Christmas, Happy New Year.
But I mean, the bright spot is, we can do some to try to offset this worst case scenario, but we need the bucks to do it.
This plan is amazing science. People in the state should be proud of this. The international science community lauds it, and they're especially happy with this one because it's facing realities. All right,
now so much more to talk about, and we will continue to talk about this because it is a crucial issue facing the state and the nation, really. All right, now, though, over to Jeff. And the season was not so good for the Saints. It was really disappointing.
Yeah, more grim news. This is the grim side of the roundtable. Look, obviously, they were disappointed. Another 7-9 season after what we expected to be maybe a return to the playoffs. And as you said at the start of the program, 5 assistant coaches were let go yesterday. That's the largest changeover we've had in one season in the Sean Payton tenure. And that's the byproduct of 3 straight 7-9 losing seasons. What's unclear right now is who made that call. Was that strictly Sean Payton's decision? Was it Mickey Loomis's decision to make that call? Or was it from on high, from Tom Benson and Gail Benson, that changes needed to be made? I mean, Tom Benson's very much a bottom line guy. I mean, he got his start as an accountant in the car business. And the bottom line for him is he's paying Sean Payton almost $9 million a year which is among the highest paid coaches in the league, and he's not getting a return on that investment. So I think there's a little bit of uncertainty out there as to where the direction of the organization is going, especially with the uncertainty in ownership right now. There's going to be a transition at some point in the near future. And so I think there's a lot of questions out with the Saints about the future, about with Drew Brees, who's announced this week, it kind of got lost in the shuffle, but he came out and said, I'm going to play year to year now on my contract. His last year is next season, and he's not going to seek an extension. And that's unusual for him and for a player of that caliber not to seek some kind of long-term, security on his contract. So there's a lot of it's all starting to point to 2017 being kind of a make or break year, and we could see maybe a dissolution of this coaching quarterback duo that's brought so much success to the Saints.
But Sean Payton stays. There had been some speculation about him perhaps going over to the Rams.
Yes, I mean, there's been a lot of reports, a lot of smoke out there, nothing really concrete. Sean Payton's denied a lot of it, but he denied the same kind of storyline a year ago. And I know for a fact that there was conversations between the San Francisco 49ers and Sean Payton's representatives. And there's a lot of back channel work going on here, so there's plausible deniability for Sean Payton. But the Los Angeles Rams are one of the prime jobs in the NFL. Stan Kroenke is one of the richest men in the country, owns that team. It's a very high-profile market. They've got a young quarterback, Jared Goff, who Sean Payton liked in the draft last year. A lot of things added up, and I still think there's some wiggle room if they really wanted to make a move for Sean Payton, that the organization might see what I was just alluding to, that 2017 might be the last year of this. They might decide to move on now from Sean Payton and let him out of his contract. So it's a very complicated, fluid situation.
Could Brees stay? Would he have to stay and play for another coach under
his
contract?
No, he wouldn't have to. I mean, next year would be his last year. I mean, he would be under contract next year, but he could certainly move on. And I expect he would move on if Sean Payton weren't here. I think they're kind of married together in that regard.
Jeff, remember when after the disastrous Mike Ditka season, when they only won one game the whole season, and then the next day Tom Benson fired everybody. I mean, everybody, like the ticket guys and everybody.
Right.
Even the dog that picked up the tea was fired. Everything. I mean, just scratch. Okay. And then, I mean, the team really seemed to have fallen into a hole at that point. But yeah, it was only like about 2 years. They hired Jim Haslett. It was only about 2 years before they were actually in the playoffs, and then not that many years before they were a Super Bowl contender. I mean, could it be that going through these kind of changes is good and that it shakes up things? And
well, there's that thought, but I think a lot of people in the Saints organization, including Mickey Loomis, believe Sean Payton's one of the best coaches in the NFL, and he certainly has the record to back that up. But at some point, he's probably is going to move on. I mean, his mentor was Bill Parcells, who legendarily moved on after 4 years and skipped around the NFL. I think there's a little wanderlust in Sean Payton, but I think he also knows he has a Hall of Fame quarterback here. He has a great ownership situation in that regard, that they don't meddle with the football operations. And he knows that he's probably not going to get a better situation than he's got right here, right now. And I think he's encouraged by what he's seen on the field. I think he thinks they're a little better than a lot of people outside the building believe.
Well, you say he's one of the best coaches in the league. Not lately. What is his overall won-loss record since he's been here, and what is his record over the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, his won-loss record overall, I believe, is like 56% winning percentage, which is the highest in the franchise, but that's a pretty low bar we're talking about here. I think the big difference is the last part of his tenure, the last 5 years, they've suffered 4 losing seasons, had 1 playoff run, and there's a line of demarcation after 2011 that it's not the same organization. And I think, I think there's some legitimate concern from Tom Benson about where everything's going. And Tom Benson's 89, he's going to turn 90 in July. He's not day-to-day like he used to be, like when you talked about him cleaning house back in 99.
So real quick, what's a Saints fan to think right now?
I think there's legitimate cause for concern. I'll draw this quick parallel. In Atlanta, the last game, Arthur Blank gives a press conference in the locker room. They're going to the playoffs. They're 11-5, second best seed in the NFC. They're building a $1.6 billion stadium right across the street. If you're an Atlanta Falcons fan, you've got a lot more to look forward to than the Saints do.
Okay. not so good news there either. Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. Okay, we're going to go over to Donna and hopefully some better news.
We're going to talk. Oops, sorry.
Talking
I'm
about
going to
Canal
throw my
Street.
notes at you. We're going to talk about Canal Street and redevelopment along Canal Street. There's one section Errol and I were discussing in the 1000 block of Canal Street that just looks horrid and has for years. It's where the Lowe's Theater is, not Lowe's Hotel. Lowe's Theater, which is the last of the 4 major theaters that hasn't been renovated. The entire block right there right now is shut down based on code violations from the city. Kurt Weigel with the Downtown Development District said that actually provides a really good opportunity. It's not great to look at, but a developer can come in and envision a clean slate, new ideas. And on just the opposite side of Canal Street, development is happening and the street is changing. I told you before we went on, I drove Canal Street on the way here. Rainy, dreary day, and there were people walking all over. You know, it didn't look like Manhattan, but it did look like a real downtown area with some vibe to it. On the opposite side, the Astrocom Plaza has done new retail on the bottom. In the ground floor, they have True Religion, which opened last year and has reported very strong sales, which Kurt Weigel also told me good for national pitches. If they can bring in an international retailer like True Religion and say, look at the sales numbers here, look what they're doing, despite what's across the street.
What does it sell?
Clothing.
Okay.
And right next to True Religion, there are signs up, but there's been no official announcement that MAC Cosmetics is coming in, another international brand. So there's good news right across the street. There's also good news farther in towards town, not towards the river, right at Canal and Claiborne, in the hospital area, with redevelopment of the Jung Hotel, which is supposed to open sometime in the next year. That's a 110-year-old building, 145 hotel rooms and 175 apartments together in a restored building. The old UNO building is being turned into a Town Place and Spring Hill Suites combination hotel. The Canal Street Hotel, which had formerly operated as a Days Inn, is also being rehabbed and rebuilt. So those big projects, they're hoping kind of bleed farther down the street and connect both ends of Canal Street with development. And they're expecting that those new projects will continue to put pressure on areas like the 1000 block where the Lowe's Theater is. Mr. Weigel also told me today that to expect some sort of announcement out of the Lowe's Theater in 2017. I said, first quarter? No. Second quarter? No. Sometime in 2017. There is a new plan on the table for that theater. It may not be theater, but that should bring that area back as well. It seems like when you talk about it, there's a whole lot of hotel rooms coming and a whole lot of apartments coming. There are the apartments at 1201 Canal as well. And they are expecting at some point a tapering off, that the supply may exceed the demand for a while. But
the medical center
the
has
medical
to be
center
stimulating this.
is stimulating it some, and developers are looking. So there could be good news along Canal Street, really.
Continued
both
growth.
sides of the street. You know, the French Quarter side of Canal Street is really looking good and mostly not vacant. It's that opposite CBD side of the street that has a lot of vacancy still.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. And we're going to go over to Errol right now and talk about suburban stores, some of them closing.
Yeah, the big news was the Macy's Esplanade Mall. And the same day, just from separate companies, it was also announced that the Kmart at Elmwood was going to be closed, as well as the Sears and Gretna at Oakwood Mall. And it would be wrong to look at this as a sign about the area economy into itself, because this has happened all across the country, that a lot of these stores are in trouble. The whole Kmart and Sears, which are in great difficulty, and Macy's had announced a huge cutback. And so it's really part of a national trend. I think the question is why these particular areas. And you know, the Esplanade Mall in Kenner, when it opened like with really great fanfare, because Kenner is a growing area. There's a lot of money out there, a lot of activity. And it never really caught on the way it was expected. And I think part of it is that Kenner is sort of like a pocket, or it's a corner over on the East Bank, but along the way to getting there, there's Lakeside Shopping Center. So any people who live in the rest of the East Bank, Jefferson Parish, or who live in Orleans Parish, that Lakeside Shopping Center can siphon away a lot of that business. Plus, it's a big, prosperous shopping center. And then you have Clearview, which is a smaller shopping center, but I think ever since the Target opened there, that's drawing a lot of money. Plus, they have a movie theater facility, and there is a Sears there. And so there is some competition along the way. Now, the acting mayor of Kenner said that the Esplanade Mall has been sold to a company that specializes in troubled shopping centers. So you can tell this is a problem around the nation. There's even companies that specialize in dealing with them. And he was kind of speculating that they would fill it with things. Is it the kind of, I don't know if these things become really high-end shopping centers anymore, but he thought they could kind of create some economic activity. But the other thing everybody's talking about, of course, is the impact of the internet, which is just huge across the entire industry when people can just sit home and order things. And
that's what we were talking about with Canal Street too, just encouraging people to even build or open up brick and mortar stores with the internet. It's a tribute to Canal Street that they're happening there, and hard to do out in Esplanade.
And you wonder who that's going to favor. I mean, will that favor more of the specialty shop, or the kind of people who have the items you can't get over the internet quite as easily? And so the whole retail business is in flux right now. And so when you see these changes going on, I think it's a combination of a national trend, the particular neighborhood. There's economic problems on the West Bank too. And just the impact of the internet.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of a changing landscape then in retail in the greater New Orleans region. All right, thanks a lot, Errol. We're going to go back over to Bob right now, and we saw really incredible flooding during the summer, and this was because of incredible rainfall in parts of Louisiana. What do we sort of learn about the internal flooding and rivers flowing?
Well, first of all, it has nothing to do with the coastal crisis. In the Baton Rouge area in August, if you get 30 inches of rain in 32 hours anywhere, unless you live on a mountaintop, you're in trouble. You're going to flood. The big takeaways there would be there's been science before then and then since that event that says the forecast for the climate model shows that there will be more storms like this more frequently, more extreme events, and especially in the Gulf South, because the air is much more humid, the temperature is warmer, there's more evaporation, more expansion of the water vapor into these big storms. And so the likelihood that these will happen more often is rising, and the risk is heavier. So the first takeaway is everyone lives in a flood zone now. If you don't have flood insurance, you need to get it. And in most cases, it's just a couple $100 a year. And it might not happen, but it's more likely now than ever before, even if you're 200 miles off the coast in this region. There were some projects on the Amite and Comite rivers that have been long delayed by Congress that have gotten a new life since then. In fact, since that storm, they passed another Water Resources Development Act in Congress, and there's some more money coming for these projects to better deal with basically the flood prevention in these river basins. But overall, they had 1,000-year rainstorms, and there's really not much you can do that except, get your boat ready and paddle away. And
be prepared for it. And like you said, make sure you have flood insurance, because everybody has to consider themselves now in a flood zone.
Well, the people in St. Tammany Parish officials, I did a reaction story the next day on that master plan, and they said, look, the big takeaway here is get flood insurance. This is going to come. It's getting riskier. There are things available now also. There are grants for floodproofing, for elevations, for different things you can do now if you live in these areas that are flood prone. Don't ignore it. Don't say it can't happen to me. We know it can.
That's what's kind of confusing, though, when you say areas that are flood prone. People had been flooded who'd been there 30, 40 years and had never seen a flood before. So you just really do need to be prepared. And I read earlier that a couple of communities have actually sued the state, saying for this wall that's on the median on I-12. Yeah, that it basically served as a retention pond, and the communities, I think it was Baker and Denham Springs.
Well, everyone often asks me, you shouldn't build on deltas. What's the best way to develop on a river delta? Well, you shouldn't, but if you do, everything should be on stilts. Otherwise, you're blocking the natural drainage in these areas, and that's always going to create flooding.
And these are lessons that we are learning. And we are experiencing it all too often. Let's go back over to Jeff quickly about our Pelicans now. They looked like they were on a roll for a while, but they're going on the road.
It was
2 losses.
Tough loss on Wednesday night to the Atlanta Hawks at home. That was one they had to have. Now they're going on the road for 5 games. They're 8 games under 500. And after they get back from this road trip, we'll be right at the halfway mark of the NBA season, 41 games halfway through. I think they're going to struggle to get a winning record on the road trip, so they're going to be well under 500, and I just don't see a really positive outlook for this team. They're trying. Now they've signed a 7-foot Lithuanian, Donatas Mačiulis, who's coming in. He'll be probably playing soon, and there's rumors that they're trying to make a a trade for all-star forward Paul Millsaps from the Atlanta Hawks, who played last night, by the way. But it seems a little like moves of desperation to me, trying to get into the playoffs this year because the general manager, Dell Demps, is on the hot seat, as is head coach Alvin Gentry. And I really worry that they're trying to mortgage the future for their own sake, to try and maybe sneak into the playoffs and avoid maybe the axe at the end of the season. So I'm not sure who's watching the fort there, if that's Mickey Loomis or Tom Benson, but to me it reeks of desperation.
How long can they keep AD if they don't get some help and become winners?
Well, he's here through 4 more years contractually, but there could be a point where he gets fed up with the direction of the organization, much like Chris Paul did, and kind of argued his way out of town.
AD, Anthony Davis,
Yeah.
is that who you're talking about? That's for us quasi-sports fans. Again, I ask you, what's a Saints fan to think? Well, what's a Pelicans fan to think?
Well, look, this is normally the time of year where we turn our attention to the Pelicans. Now that the football season's over, I'm going to be interested to see how many people are going to the games. If you've noticed, Pelicans are advertising all over town in every format to try and get people to come out because they're hurting for ticket sales. That is something that Tom Benson will notice, and that could pave the way for a big change after the season. If they don't get people out there.
Mickey Loomis is safe?
Yeah, there's no question he's safe. He and Dennis Lauscher are basically running the two organizations. Safest 2 people in the building.
2017 make or break for both teams, you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a huge crossroads. I think actually this year's make or break for the Pelicans.
But Jeff, with the whole support package that they have with the underwriting and the sponsors and all that, isn't the franchise still making money?
Sure. It's very comparable to buying your second home in another market and you bought the worst home on the block. That's what the Pelicans are. The entire NBA is appreciating in value. If Tom Benson sells it tomorrow, he'll make a fortune.
All right, it's time for us to look ahead. Errol.
Well, just a little nostalgic thing. Today is 12th night, and it's a Friday. And it brings to mind 12th night of 2006. When the show came back, it had been off since August with Katrina. So it had been off all that period of time. And when we came back, it was a Friday. It was 12th night. And it's kind of symbolic because 12th night, the epiphany and the rebirth.
Right.
It was like the rebirth of the show. So just thinking about that.
That's a very nice thought. Bob.
Well, winter's coming to a close soon, and the legislature will be looking at this new plan. It'll be interesting to see if they once again support it unanimously.
All right. Don.
Bob was talking about the coastline and all that. You can do your very small part. Christmas tree recycling is next week in Orleans Parish. Your tree goes out between January 12th and 14th on your regular day. All the parishes you can find online.
All right. All ornaments off, no flocking.
All
anything
ornaments,
like that.
no
Just a
flocking,
plain
no
tree.
lights, no stands, plain tree.
Right.
And they collected over 6,000 of them last year in
Okay.
Orleans Parish.
Jeff.
We all know one of New Orleans' favorite sons, Steve Gleason. The documentary Gleason has made the cut now at the Academy Awards for Best Documentary
Wonderful.
down to 15. Among 15 semifinalists. They should find out in the next week or two if they make the final 5, which will be part of the ceremony in L.A. So
well,
keep your fingers crossed.
We're pulling for him. All right. Thanks, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.